Hello, friends and beautiful people. I'm finally live. Hello, hello, hello. It's Catherine Massell, Elevated Consciousness Coach, New Earth Visionary, for day one of Self-Sabotage to Self-Support workshop. I made it. There I am. I'm live. Apologies for the delay. We're having some crazy internet stuff happening. And hopefully it won't keep going in and out like it has been. Hi, Michelle. So I'm going to wait for a few of you to jump on. You may want to grab some water if you don't have some already. Okay. So welcome to this two-day workshop. We're going to go into why it is that we have the triggers that we do. In those moments where life feels challenging, where we're facing some kind of adversity in life, we get triggered, right? To maybe retreat, run home to a part of self that feels like it has more of the answers, or we feel like this is the part of self that's more capable than we are. And I call them your self-saboteurs. They are also agents of change in your life, because in these self-saboteurs and in these self-sabotaging behaviors, there is a whole lot of energetic potential for creation that is ready to be unlocked. Okay. Hi, DC. Hello, everyone who's joining. Say hello. Let me know you're here. And if you're watching replay, hashtag replay. So these parts of self are really just agents showing us where there is room to grow and evolve. And my particular take on this and how I teach about this in my In Alignment program in particular, which starts next week. So if this sets off all the bells and whistles for you, you're going to want to get into this program. But the way I teach it is really that these self-saboteurs are parts of self that we've pushed away at. They exist in shadow. They came to us early on in life when we faced our first challenge or set of challenges as a young person, as a tiny human. And we developed these parts of self as part of the ego's inception. And also the way I teach about ego is where we decide to separate from source, because we make this decision as humans, and we make the decision by choosing a certain way of being, a mindset, a way of thinking or feeling about ourselves that separates us out from source, that fragments us from pure source being, or that which is whole, in other words. And over time, we tend to fragment more and more and more and more from source, based on our continued use or go-to or default patterning to turn to these saboteurs in times in our life where we feel triggered, where we're in a crisis, okay? But these parts of self that exist in shadow, it's really interesting the paradox with which we play with this in our lives, because while the saboteurs are a part of self, where they signify a part of self that we think we can push away at and say, get away from me, you're lesser than, I don't want you, I don't want to admit you're part of me, all that kind of stuff. So it exists in shadow. This aspect of self, or aspects of self, will exist in shadow. Which really means to me, something existing in shadow is something existing without the light of your love. And when you bring these aspects of self that you could never really push away at, by the way, that's an illusory mindset that we developed in order to keep ourselves safe or feel like, we are in control. You can't get rid of any part of yourself. It's not possible. You are always whole. Whether you believe so or not is an entirely different, ball game. But you can't push away at who you are. You are never not whole. You are never not the fullness of you, okay? Shadow, light, and all, okay? But what we do in the paradox is interesting because we try to push away at these parts of self, but at the same time, these are the exact heroes in our life that are rescuing us from painful situations because we've assigned some sort of value, as effed up as it might be, to these aspects of self to have more of the answers, to be more brave, to stand up to a bully, to handle abuse in its many myriad forms, to handle anything uncomfortable. Hey, Angela. Hi, Danielle. Hi, DC. Hello, everyone who's here. So does that make sense? How we kind of play with this paradox? And I will go into this and I will explain this more, but I want to set the groundwork for, what the self-saboteurs really are. And if we can see them accurately as they really are and see them in their capacity to perform in our lives as actually agents of change in a positive way rather than in the negative shadow way, we can start to come back into feeling our fullness, feeling our wholeness. Because remember, I just said, we're never not whole. We are never not the fullness of who we are. We just feel as if we aren't, okay? And these saboteurs, I think, are a key aspect in helping us get back into the feelingness, the sensory satisfaction of being whole, okay? So when you get triggered, when life throws you, some sort of obstacle in your path, and there's a monkey wrench in the works, it could be anything at all. It could be an argument with your husband, it could be a misunderstanding with your kids, it could be something that happens at work, it could be, something that's happening in the world at large, on the grand planetary scale of things that you just feel maybe a sense of not being safe or secure, or even a kind of hopelessness. We see a lot of things playing out on the world stage that are not very wholesome. And the last 2 years has been like, it's just like, enjoy the show because here comes something else, right? And so that can feel not only draining on our nervous system completely, but in those moments, we tend to drift from our wholeness or feel like we're not whole, or we feel like in any moment we don't feel like we don't have all the answers, or we don't feel in a solution-based mode in our life, which is often. Then if we're not in a solution-based mode, we're in a crisis mode. If we're not in a solution-based mode, we're in a problem-based mode, and we don't know how to get ourselves out of it. Chances are really, really good, like 99.9999% of the time, that we're going to defer to a part of self to be like, I can't handle this, you take over. This is what I think of as our saboteurs, okay? And our saboteurs are only acting on an impulse to keep us safe, to try to protect us. Ultimately, our saboteurs, when we bring them back into the light of our love, we can see that they've only and ever been trying to protect us in situations where we don't feel we have all the answers, or we feel put upon by life, or we feel triggered intensely, or we're in crisis mode and in problem-based mode, okay? So when we begin to look at our saboteurs as just an energetic potential, and we're going to go through a bunch of different saboteurs here, and you're going to have an opportunity to take an assessment tonight, a saboteur assessment, to see where the archetypes of these saboteurs resonate most in your life, okay? In those moments you feel triggered, or you feel like you're in crisis mode. But I'm going to talk about them here really generally here today to give you an idea of how they work and what their identities might be and which ones might resonate with you the most. And then you'll have the opportunity to take that assessment tonight. And when we come back tomorrow, we're going to go a little bit deeper into all of these. And this is a big part of what I do in the In Alignment and Thriving core program. We go deep into this, self-sabotaging, self-negating, self-denying way of being so we can clear it, because we've created a lot of layers of self that aren't really true. They project a false sense of self onto us that we keep pandering to and catering to throughout our lives unless we interrupt the process. And so I'm really good at being able to help you work through this shadow and work through this darkness, see what it really is. Hi, Heidi. and then be able to come out on the other side of it. And what I also do in the program, and hopefully I'll do it in today and tomorrow, is really help you to see the light and energetic potential for creation that's actually available when you are able to transmute and transfer the energy of your saboteurs from the negative shadow mode and into their light. Because they've rescued you from situations, in a way, that's a way of looking at it, rescued you from situations where you felt incapable or didn't trust yourself before. And that's been the shadow version of that, because you didn't feel in your power and you felt like you were giving something away to a part that had more answers, more power. When we look at our saboteurs in the light, they're also our rescuers, but they have answers. They're more solution-based. They allow you to see where your strengths and gifts and sometimes even talents really lie. So it's quite an evolution to be able to work with your self-sabotaging behaviors in this way and your self-saboteurs, because here's the thing. Every single person on this planet has self-saboteurs because we all have ego. And self-saboteurs come from the ego's inception. In other words, our split from the divine. I call it the original cause event or the core wound. When we make a decision not to trust ourselves, not to believe that we're capable in difficult situations, that's when we create our saboteurs. That's when we split from ego. That's when we fragment from source. Okay? Hopefully my internet connection will not go wonky on me again. I've had a difficult morning. So, does this make sense so far, how I'm framing all of this? So, as a very little kid, you may not even remember, you may not even have full conscious recall of it, and that's okay. I take you through a very deep integrative process, a deep shadow process, to help you uncover this core wound, and sometimes wounds plural. But what's foundational to everyone is that we had a time in our lives when we were a tiny human where we had a moment of crisis. We were confronted with, interfacing with a very difficult situation. It could be any number of things. I mean, when we hear triggers or trauma, we automatically think of some form of abuse. Trauma has many, many, many forms, and we all have trauma. I don't care how successful, what level of achievement you're at in life, we all have trauma that we're still in layers healing from, okay? That's what makes us human, is that we're here to play with this level of contrast, okay? But as a very little kid, you made a decision when interfacing or confronting something painful for you. It could have been watching your parents have a fight. It could have been, even maybe watching a parent hit the other parent. It could have been bullied on the playground. You were bullied by the bigger kid at school. It could have been when you found out that's, something that you had been told as a little kid wasn't true. It could be any number of things. Trauma comes in many, 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 many forms, okay? But in the moment, it was painful for you and you decided, I can't deal with this. I don't have what it takes. I don't trust myself. I can't handle this. I'm incapable to be with this. And, as a tiny human on a developmental level, we don't have the ability for the kind of cogent thinking to be able to link an event with, well, this is happening because mom is feeling this way or dad is feeling that way, or, this person is going through their own traumas. Like we're not developmentally, we're not at a stage where we can put those things together and make sense of our reality in a way that we can when we become adults, right? So you make a decision. You make a decision that there's going to be a part of you that can handle what's going on, that is able to be with what's happening and take care of it and make sure that you're safe. And the ultimate thing is about being safe. And that's why the saboteurs are a mechanism, a product of the ego, because your saboteurs are there and they come about in your life because you're in a moment where you don't feel safe, stable, or secure. You don't feel protected, okay? And every single one of us can remember, hi Kimberly, listening while getting ready for work. Awesome. I hope you'll watch the replay later. So ultimately, we assign an identity to this part of ego, or the part of what the inception of ego really is what it is. But the ego can have many, many forms. It can have many branches of self. It can have many identities, archetypes, etc. And so we assign an identity to this ego when we split from the divine, we fragment from source, and we say, here, you control this situation. You be in charge. You keep me safe, right? And the controller is one of the archetypes, one of the saboteurs that we talk about in this program. But there are many. There are a lot. So you might think that in that moment you had to hide. I mean, you might have done this in a number of ways, like physically hide out underneath the bed, or you may have hid from yourself. You try to hide yourself, make yourself small so that you can't be found, okay? You uncover a moment of unsafety, of insecurity. And it's just a protective mechanism built into the software, your human software of your ego, to keep you safe, to keep you in a place where you can survive, in other words. Because everything about the ego and how it's programmed and how it conditions you throughout life, if you keep delegating your attention and focus and awareness to it, is all about survival and nothing more. So your ego, and including the self-saboteurs that are a function of the ego, are not built, designed to help you to see and suss out potentials that have not been part of your experience yet, and say, okay, it's safe for that. You know, you'll be fine if you do that. The ego is not programmed that way. The ego is programmed, and the saboteurs, as functions of the ego, are programmed to scan for threats constantly. That's all it does. And a threat would be something that veers from your normal everyday operating procedures, your normal everyday operating ways of thinking, feeling, believing, behaving, okay? That's a threat. Now you might think in your conscious mind, as you're evaluating this information right now, as I'm delivering it to you, you're like, well, you know, doing something new isn't a threat. No, because you're being objective about it and you're thinking about it and you're having the moment to take it from the subconscious to the conscious. But the ego is largely subconscious and controls about 90% thereabouts of your life and what you are doing moment to moment based on this level of programming. And if the subconscious has been programmed since the time you were a tiny human to feel unsafe in a situation where, let's just say, people are arguing, you are going to have this ramping up in your heartbeat. You're going to feel it in your, parasympathetic nervous system, where if you hear voices raised anywhere, you are going to kind of freeze up and, maybe even run screaming and leave skid marks behind because you got to get out of there and you can't get out of there fast enough. Okay. Or, could be something where you were yelled at maybe as a little kid, you were punished for something. And maybe it wasn't even something that was so terrible. You didn't do anything so terrible. And it was maybe an adult, a peer, someone who was fostering you, yelling at you. And really it was just them projecting their shit on you, but you didn't know any better when you were a little kid. So you took it on that you were stupid, or that, you're never going to amount to anything. Or, you're sick, you're gross, whatever that is. And that when you are facing situations from that moment on, anytime in your life where you're getting that kind of negative feedback again, you believe it. And a part of you shuts down even more in the light of that. Yeah? So when you get triggered, when life triggers you, meaning when you feel those moments where you freeze up, or you get scared, or you want to shut down, you want to hide, you want to run away, or, because we have two different functions of ego, we have inferiority ego, which is what I just talked about, where you want to shut down, you want to hide, you want to crawl into the smallest turtle shell possible and just, wake up or emerge 5 years later. Or, you will keep your opinions to yourself. You won't speak out. You won't try to take up too much space in the world. That's inferiority ego. That means that from the ego's operation and viewpoint, you see yourself as less than human. And this is just a means by which we compensate for not feeling whole. Okay? But we can also feel more than human, and this is like the superiority ego, where we will get big and boisterous and become the bully, even though we might be hurting inside and we might feel that we are being judged harshly, or we're not being understood properly, or someone's been downright mean to us. Some of us will go the other route and become bigger than life, bigger than human, and get very boisterous, very angry, maybe even very physical. Okay, instead of shrinking, we tend to expand and get really big and scary to other people. And one isn't better than the other. It's, again, down to characteristics and what kind of modeling we had when we were growing up in life from other people who showed us how to behave in the world when there was uncomfortable situations. Okay. So when you're triggered, when you have those moments where you are being judged harshly, or you have those moments where your nervous system starts to, go crazy, and you feel like you are, I do both. Yeah, I do too, Dee. I do both. Less than I used to. I should say I have the tendency to do both, but I've gotten really good at being able to keep tabs on my saboteurs so that I don't act out just as a knee-jerk reaction anymore. And I've learned to bring my saboteurs into the light, so they are higher agents for change. So if you, find you're in a moment, it could be also when you feel like you're not getting the love that you need. You're not getting nurturing, you're not getting attention. You feel like you're being ignored. You feel like you're invisible in this world. There's a lot of different triggers we can have, but the foundational thing to take away here is that when we get triggered, and there's many, many different ways we do it, what's the part of self that you run home to? Too many comments about my sassiness. That's okay too. Be sassy. I'm very sassy. In fact, when I was a little kid, my nickname was Sassy Kathy, which I hated. So I was a rather quiet child, but when I had something to say, I didn't hold back. Much to the chagrin of all the adults in my world when I was growing up. So when you are in that moment of being triggered, you tend to go to that lie about yourself that you still believe. This is what kicks the saboteurs into hyperdrive. So when you are triggered, there's a moment, there's a beat, it's a sweet spot where you can have that knee-jerk reaction and let your saboteurs rule the day once again, as simply, what they're doing, what they're meant to do, because you feel unsafe. And anytime the ego says, hey, we're unsafe, the saboteurs are going to kick in and try to rescue you. They're going to try to save the day. That's just what they're programmed to do. They're there to protect you, okay? They're just doing it, going about it in a way that exists in shadow rather than light or love, okay? But your saboteurs really do love you, believe me. So what, in that moment, that sweet spot where you can go into that knee-jerk reaction of your saboteur, and you can go to that default lie that you still believe about yourself in the moment of that trigger, which brings the saboteur into hyperdrive, meaning then it's the one that's going to interface with this incident or whatever is going on, okay? What is the lie that you still believe about yourself? In those moments, I'll give you an example, okay? And I used this the other day in my course that I'm teaching, Strong Supported Healer, and I was talking about being able to take up more space, because a lot of, I have a mix. My saboteurs, some of them are more like on the superiority ego side, like bigger than life, and some are on the inferiority ego side, like smaller than life. I want to shrink away. But the part of me that ended up coming through a few times in my life when I was in food service. I was in hospitality for a really long time. I was a bartender for a really long time. And I worked in a place where it was mostly men behind the bar. Out of 9 bartenders, I was the only woman for a while, until almost the time that I quit. And it was always felt like the men knew more. The men took up more space, and I mean literally and physically, they took up more space. I'm 5'4", and most of the bartenders I work with were 6 feet or taller. So I felt dwarfed by them physically, but I also felt dwarfed by them emotionally, mentally. They were not afraid to throw their weight around in how they spoke and how they interacted, and oftentimes, locker room talk, which doesn't bother me. I'm not a shrinking violet by any stretch, and I grew up as a tomboy. I actually genuinely like being around men. And for most of my life, I liked being around men more than I liked being around women, because I found women to be too catty. Thankfully, that changed. But I felt very much in that space. Even though I was a good bartender, I knew my stuff. I was, on top of my game. I worked at one of the most successful bars in San Francisco at the time, one of the most popular, successful bars in San Francisco at the time. It was a high-end restaurant, and I was on top of my game. And so I felt, in a lot of ways, more than adequate, okay? But in those moments where we'd have meetings or whatever, and I, like everyone else, was being asked their opinion on maybe a new drink or bringing in a new, bar program or whatever that might have been, I always felt like my opinion wasn't as valid. And usually that was confirmed for me by having one or more of the men there trample over my words and interrupt me while I was talking. Because I would tend to be smaller, and I was in this kind of avoider energy, which is another saboteur that we can have, where we can hide away. We want to shrink. It's that inferior ego archetype. I want to lose myself, or I want to deflect things, right? I want to numb out and pretend like, la la la, you don't see me, I'm not here, okay? And then I got tired of that. Until one day, one of my other saboteurs decided it was going to take charge and run the show. So once again, when my words are being trampled over by another one of my colleagues, my controller archetype, which is a superiority ego archetype or personality trait, came through and was like, hold up. You're not going to disrespect me again. I have something to say. My opinion is just as valid as everyone else here. And please do not talk over me. It's very disrespectful, and it feels like you don't see me, and my opinion isn't valid. I'm part of the team, and if we're not a part of the team, if we're not all part of a team here, what are we doing? Why do I need to even be at this meeting? And I got very vocal to the point where I was just like kind of checked out from it, where I was like, pulled back into another version of myself, watching myself do this. So it was kind of surreal. But either way you look at it, that was a threatening situation to me. That was a crisis. I was interfacing with a problem in a situation where I felt like I couldn't handle it. So I delegated to a part of myself that I thought could. Okay? So does that make sense? So as a child, I had learned how to be an avoider. Classic middle child here. I have an older brother who's definitely the golden son. Like can do no wrong. He's, he was born with this a halo of the sun around him and continued to have that his whole life. I love my brother, don't get me wrong. But growing up with that, and he could do no wrong, was difficult. And then I came along a year later, almost exactly a year later. And then 8 years after that, my younger brother and sister were born, and they are fraternal twins. So even though they're 2 kids, I was the middle child. And so I don't know if any of you are middle children, but it can be kind of an isolating experience. And you have a lot more, how do I want to say? You have a lot more responsibility in the family. Like, it was put on me not only because I was a female, but I was taking care of my younger brother and sister when I was only 8 years old. And I didn't get to have much of my own childhood. I'm not blaming anybody here. I'm just reporting the facts. This is what was going on. I've healed all of this. But it allowed me to be in a place where I felt I could withdraw more and more. And even though I decided to make myself feel invisible, at the time I believed that I was being made to feel invisible and that I wasn't allowed to take up too much space, do much, say much, enjoy my childhood, go out and play with the other kids. And it really felt like I had to retreat to a part of myself that was capable, that could be loved. And so I lived in my head a lot. And I played alone a lot. And becoming the avoider archetype was just kind of a natural progression for me to be an avoider. But it also, allowed me to be, let's just say it, a victim, because I thought all these things were being done to me. And actually, I chose to retreat from life, from my family, whatever, and be withdrawn and be isolated. So there's a little bit of the victim rolled up in there where you feel disempowered. You're the poor me, you're the martyr, right? It's a heavily internalized reality for the victim, okay? But it also, brought in some other things for me, like the hypervigilant, because it allowed me to be in a place where I was in my own head a lot. So that meant overthinking to the bejesus, right? So that infused me with a lot of doubt. Like, who am I in this world? What is my place? Am I doomed to this kind of limbo? Like, who am I? And doubt and, even a kind of worry, like, well, who am I? And what am I going to do with my life? And I just feel like I have to create my own kind of little world to live in and exist in that suits me, because the outside world doesn't suit me at all, right? Middle child here, never had a voice when I was younger. I see it now. All this resonates. Yeah. And another thing about the hypervigilant, which is part of my bigger list of archetypes, is that constantly in this feeling like, and this expectation of what's going to go wrong next. What's the next best, what's the next worst thing? When's the other shoe going to drop and whatever. And these are archetypes, by the way, that I can talk about them and not be triggered by them, because I've been able to heal the shadow side or the negative expression of these, because our saboteurs, just like everything else exists in polarity and contrast here on planet Earth, have two sides. Okay? So your saboteurs have a negative shadow aspect, but they can also have a positive aspect. Both of them are protecting you. One is a little misguided and works in shadow, or works in a kind of darkness and without the light of your love. And then the other one works as, I call it, your master aspect. And it's actually taking all of the good traits and characteristics of your saboteur and rolling that energetic potential, which has just previously been misused, into a way to help you evolve and thrive and grow, expand in your life, and move you, actually be that kind of momentum that moves you towards the potential that you've been asking for, and which is really etched into your destiny. Potentials that you've always been aligned for, you just think you haven't. All those desires that you have as part of your, if you want to call them your dreams, your ambitions, your goals, etc., you wouldn't have them if they weren't direct gifts from the divine, because it's part of your soul's destiny. Where we get locked into in our thinking, in our consciousness, and thinking about destiny is just a pattern uninterrupted. That's all destiny is a pattern uninterrupted. And so we can have many, many destinies, okay, that we design for ourselves, because we decide to interrupt certain things. You're never veering off the path you're meant to be on, because our destiny has rolled into that potential. Many, many different branches, pathways, vessels, conveyances for arriving at your destiny. Okay? And we all have a destiny. Okay? We all have a destiny which is singular to every single one of us, that we will return to source. We are always source, and we're having a soul's experience of being on a journey and learning lessons, downloading information, cataloging experience. This is all part of our soul's journey, and so you can't ever get it wrong in that respect. But your soul has desires and dreams that filter into your human experience. Okay? So your desires and dreams aren't just the domain of your human. And the reason you have awareness of them is because they're entirely 100% meant for you. How you may go about them and how you may get them and how they may actually show up in physical reality can be the result of any number of cosmic permutations. We can't get too hung up on how something is supposed to look when we say, oh, okay, I've received this desire. It's about the feeling, right? And it's about whatever it is, however it shows up, the universe knows better than I do how I'm securing my destiny, okay? So your master aspect of your saboteurs, when used correctly, and you bring the saboteurs back into the light of your love, helps you to direct that path towards your destiny even more. And it's really quite an amazing thing to witness and facilitate, because that is what I facilitate in the In Alignment program. So I want to talk about the saboteurs that we go through in the saboteur assessment. So as I mentioned, and if you're joining late here, at the beginning of the call, I talked about a saboteur assessment that you can take. And I'm going to put it here in the comments, but I'll also put it in the group tonight. So the saboteurs I'm about to talk about are the ones that we work with in this saboteur assessment. This is not mine. This is not my saboteur assessment. I don't charge for this. It's not mine. So that's why it's on the intro page of my, hold on, I gotta move this here, of my course for In Alignment and Thriving Core program. So I'm going to give you the link for that. So when you log on to my page in my member vault, what you have is all of my current programs and courses, and In Alignment and Thriving Core program is right at the top there. And so when you scroll through to the bottom of the In Alignment and Thriving Core program description, down at the very bottom is a saboteur assessment. So you scroll all the way down, read all the great stuff, read the member testimonials, watch the member testimonial videos. They're awesome. In Alignment and Thriving starts next Thursday. And you go all the way down to the bottom. There's the saboteur assessment link right there. It's totally free. You just need an email so that they can send you the results. And so when you get the results, it will categorize your saboteurs as they occur most often for you, and ranking them top to bottom. Okay. So everybody's got a little bit of these saboteurs, but some of us have more of these saboteurs than others. Okay. That's just how we are. We're all individuals, right? And so what's great about this assessment is that it talks about how this saboteur works with money, relationships, your family, love life, etc. It gives you a pretty good detailed bit of information about each one, and it gives you a lot more information about things that are already part of your consciousness. You already know you're doing these things. It's already part of your subconscious for sure, because these are the aspects of you that get triggered when you are facing a crisis, when you're facing an uncomfortable moment, when you're in some level of trauma. You're maybe revisiting some kind of trauma. And like I said, trauma can exist in all forms. And trauma, in my estimation, is anywhere we have fragmented, and continue to fragment from source. That's trauma, okay? And so that can have a myriad of forms, right? So when you take the assessment, please do that tonight, because we're going to work on this tomorrow in day 2. And maybe it'll really bring in some aha moments for you. I know when I've shared this before, a lot of people will reach out to me and say, oh my God, the revelations. Because what you're doing is making the subconscious available to you in your conscious reckoning. So you're able to look at it, evaluate it, recognize, like, yeah, I can see when I do this, okay? Because a lot of us live so close to our saboteurs and our self-sabotaging, self-denying, self-betraying, self-negating behaviors. We live so close to them, we don't even see it, right? So that's why this is an incredible assessment. And we do this work in alignment and thriving, but we take it much, 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 much deeper, because I take you through a very deep core wound healing process that is like the shadow work of all shadow work. And it's kind of my zone of genius. And I offer a lot of support with this. So this is a really hands-on program where you get a ton of support from me. They're all live calls, 11 weeks worth. This is a big, big deep dive into, looking at how you have been living through a false veil of self. And we all have, to certain degrees. There are parts of self that we don't want to recognize, that we don't want to, even be able to view or look at or sit with long enough to say, hey, I see that you've actually been helping me, not hurting me. A lot of us can't even get to that point, but I will tell you this, and I told this to the ladies in my group the other day, that the second you decide to interface with shadow, the second you even decide to recognize it, and then maybe even take it a little further and sit with it and just be with your shadow, you're already shortening the duration of the visit with that shadow, meaning it has that much less control over you, that it's not running the show or driving the bus in the same way it was before. It means you're taking the reins back a little bit more. And the longer and longer you sit with your shadow and decide to interface with it, dialogue with it, ask why it's there, you're going to find out a whole host of things about yourself that allow you to come away with this feeling of, I know myself better. I know myself better. And I'll be honest, a lot of us don't really know ourselves, not in the fullness of who we are. We know ourselves in how we act out in our saboteur personalities, and we know ourselves how we act out in moments of trauma or triggering, but we don't really know ourselves, who we are at the level of our core truth. And you can only get to that if you peel away all the layers that we're not, all the false selves, all of the ways that we had to build up in order to kind of create this shield in the world so we could just survive. And a lot of us are still living that way, but we're not conscious of the fact that we're doing it. And so when we start to peel away the layers like an onion, we start to know ourselves better. We start to know what it is that really gives our life meaning. We start to know what it is that we really value. We start to know what our real principles and ethics are in life. We start to know what, or have a peek at and be able to even get a glimpse of what gives us joy, what gives us a sense of fulfillment or satisfaction. And when we are, sadly, living behind the veil of false self or false selves, as the case may be, we're not in a place where we can see this. It exists somewhere in our periphery, but we just can't get at it. We can't see it. And we're not in a place to really resonate with it because we're in survival mode. So when we're living at a level of false self and we're living at the behest of all these saboteurs, what we're really doing is living in a survival state mentality. This is not a creative state. Our sole focus in survival mode is to survive, and that's it. That's the end. That's where our energy goes, our attention, our focus, and that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else. And we have many ways of thinking and feeling and believing about our everyday existence that because of these trigger moments, we're just trying to survive. But I invite you to start thinking about these trigger moments are opportunities for you to see yourself, where can I know myself better here? Where can I be curious instead about, why am I reacting this way again? And even in the moment where we decide to become curious, we move into this kind of place of neutrality. We settle the vagus nerve, which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. We calm our nervous system down. We stop cortisol levels from rising in the body. We stop the fight or flight response, in other words, and we can be calm. And then we're moving to a different mentality. We're moving to a more of a creative state. The second we become curious in our triggers, instead of going into that knee-jerk reaction of, delegating our energy and attention and focus once again to the saboteur or to the ego. And everything about our progression into higher states of awareness is about being able to be creative. It's not about survival mentality. Those two things are mutually exclusive. Survival and aligning with the resonance of New Earth and unity consciousness. Those things exist at odds with each other. And thereby, if you identify yourself in survival mode all the time, you are existing at odds with unity consciousness. And mostly because you are at odds with yourself within. And it is impossible to resonate with and have the experience of unity consciousness without, meaning in your external reality, unless it already is present in your inner world. So being able to heal these saboteurs, these agents that are really there to protect you, but move them out from the shadow and into the light, this is an integral process, a very deep and important one, a pivotal process for helping you to embody unity consciousness within. Because you will never know it without unless you can do this first, okay? So this is important work. I say this, and it's a little funny, like, yeah, it's not the sexiest work. It's not, it can be painful in the beginning. And, the women that I've worked with in Alignment and Thriving, they're brave souls. They're willing to look at this stuff. They've lived their lives in this kind of feast, famine, push-pull, stop-start way of being for so long. They're like, I'm done with it. I'm done with it. I'm sick of it. I can't live this way anymore. It doesn't align with who I really believe I am. I can't live at the level of my core truth, meaning what I value, what gives me meaning, what gives me joy, what gives me kind of an ecstatic happiness in my life. I can't do this anymore. I don't want it anymore. So when you get to that place, you tend to want to throw everything at it, no matter how painful or discomfort, how much discomfort you might feel. You tend to want to throw everything at it to make sure that this doesn't happen anymore, that you don't default to this survival mode way of being anymore, because it's really not just serving us at all. And it is part of the 3D experience to be in this kind of survival mode mentality and to align with all the fear, lack, scarcity, poverty that goes along with it. But this too is just a station of awareness. 3D reality in the physical realm is just meant to be a station of our evolutionary process as an evolving human. We're never meant to stay here. We're never meant to languish here. That's not our destiny. Our destiny is infinite and incremental growth and evolution over time. That's who we are, because we are infinite eternal beings. We never stop growing. So even though you may feel stuck with your saboteurs or stuck in survival mode consciousness, you are still moving and growing. But then you also have free will in this 3D time space. So you can choose at any time to say, but I'm not going to take this any further. I'm not going to apply it. I'm not going to take inspired action on this new knowledge I have about myself. And the sad thing is that many people on this planet are doing this all the time. Because you're never not evolving and growing. But with our free will choice, we can say, but I'm not going to do anything with it. Because it's too painful. It's too uncomfortable. It's too unsightly. It's not sexy. Right? But this is the work that's required if you want to evolve your state of awareness. It's entirely pivotal. So let's go and talk about these saboteurs one by one. And there are 9 of them. Okay, so the hyperachiever. I also have this is at the top of my chart, the hyperachiever. It's this need to be constantly performing, okay? That the validation for my very existence based on how productive I'm being, okay? And that if I'm not being productive, then who am I? What kind of mark am I leaving in the world if I can't prove I was here, right? Through the result of productivity or creating something or whatever. But it's an emotional and diverting tactic, okay? Because it keeps our attention and focus on the external world and external validation rather than our own ability to validate ourselves internally. And I've, been able to work with this and, yes, I'm always going to be someone who likes to produce things. I am a hyperachiever, and I don't want to negate that entirely because I produce a lot of content and I love it and it's fantastic and it serves my community and it fulfills my purpose of how I want to serve my community in higher and better ways. But where I was going about it before was unhealthy because I was assigning all the value to I'm only as good as what I put out in the world, and it gets viewed and seen and used. Then I'm valuable. Then I can mark myself important. No. I have to be able to be proud of myself first. I have to be able to look at what I'm creating and say, I did this, and it's awesome. And I can't wait for a cheerleader outside of, in the external reality to show up and be like, well done, Catherine, because, hello, middle child, that hardly ever happened. So I got used to that early on, that no one's going to come and rescue you, no one's going to save you, no one's going to be your cheerleader. You have to do that for yourself. You have to be proud of yourself. You got to love on yourself hard. And the hyperachiever needs to do that. The controller, another one I talked about. You can't let go. You can't let go. This is the type of personality that is in micromanagement, is in the business of micromanagement. Every single thing has to be micromanaged. Every single thing has to be looked at, turned over, evaluated, scrutinized. You got to have an opinion on it, right? You have to be able to control people, situations, events. But what it ends up doing is leaving you with an endless sense of anxiety and impatience. You're that person that sits around and taps their foot at, everyone taking too long to say something, or people are too long in line in front of you at the post office. It has its ways of triggering you or being triggered by many, many things in the world, right? The controller. And by the way, all of these that I'm talking about them in the negative shadow aspect of them. But there are two sides to every saboteur, okay? And we go into this and we help you to resonate with the master aspects of this in the In Alignment program. We're going to talk about this a little bit more tomorrow. The avoider. The avoider is, it can be passive aggressive if it is in the superior ego side, which I talked about before. Or where you want to hide or shrink away from life or situations or other people, that's the inferior ego aspect. So the avoider can have both. But either way, the avoider wants to lose oneself. The avoider would like to, when my avoider would show up the most around the holidays, not so much anymore, but where, Thanksgiving would hit, and I love Thanksgiving, but on November 26th, I wanted to get in the covers, under the covers and hide, and someone wake me up on January 2nd because I don't want to deal. Or even paying your bills, like things that you have to be responsible for, that we tend to shove away at and push away at, like tomorrow, or, like doing shadow work on yourself, doing the great work of ensuring your own personal evolution. Some of us will be like, yeah, I'll do that, but then we'll find ways to not do it. Okay, this is classic avoider in action, where maybe we set up to do, those of you who are on, Facebook, and maybe you're promoting a course or doing something where you feel like you have to take a big leap forward in your business, and then you realize you have to do a Facebook Live, and you'll either break your phone or, manifest some sort of technical difficulty, or Any number of things could happen where you don't have to show up and do the thing, right? That's how that self-sabotaging mechanism can work, and that personality of the avoider. The victim. We all have a little bit of the victim in us. Some of us might score a little higher with that than others, but to the degree that we want to feel someone's going to rescue us, okay? If you have any kind of like savior complex about, either something's going to show up in the world and save you from something, a lottery ticket's going to save you from something, a person, a lover is going to save you from the loneliness you feel. It's anywhere where you're in that kind of poor me vibe. Someone come rescue me because I just can't do this myself. Like you're Rapunzel in the tower, right? You're disempowered. This is a heavily internalized reality. You constantly focus on where you are put upon by the world, and everything seems to be rigged in everyone else's favor except yours, okay? And we all have the poor me moments, myself included. I'll totally cop to that. It doesn't score as high on my chart as some of the others that I mentioned, but it's there, and it's there for all of us, really. The restless saboteur. This is where we need excitement. We gotta constantly have to have something going on, right? Something happening all the time. Got to be productive and got to keep doing stuff and seeing stuff. Got to have all the new stuff. I got to have all the new gadgets. I got to have all the new clothes. I got to sign up for all the courses. I got to, be over there. Anywhere I am over there instead of over here. That's the restless personality. It's this kind of grass is always greener type of personality that no matter where I am, it's not good enough. No matter what I'm experiencing, there's got to be more all the time. And so it's like we constantly want to escape from ourselves. And this is the great reminder for the restless archetype that wherever you go, there you are, right? So you can't rescue yourself from yourself. Not really. You have to just change your perspective in how that restless archetype works for you, because the restless archetype is actually incredibly creative. And so that's kind of going into how we loop that and roll over that energetic potential, as it's just been misused in shadow before as the restless archetype, how we roll it into the master aspect so it can be used constructively and productively in your life, okay? The hyper-rational. The hyper-rational tends to not be emotional at all. This is not an archetype that would ever be accused of wearing his or her emotions on his or her sleeve. Very rational, very, very right-brained. Very left-brained. Cold, distant, maybe even intellectually arrogant. People's needs are messy, right? People's needs are messy. I want to find the quickest route to do this where I don't have to involve other people and other people's emotions. Tends to be a person that does not look at situations very constructively or creatively, and tends to look at one side of an issue instead of weighing a lot of different sides of it, and tends to shut down the more emotional or spiritual part of self, okay? That there's only one way to skin a cat would be a great way to say it. My dad, classic hyper-rational. There's only one way to do this, and we're going to do it, and there's no jokes, and there's no silliness, and there's no funny bits. We're just doing this, and we're getting it done, and that's it. It's like, okay. But then he was a Gemini, so then he would be really playful and fun the next moment. The pleaser. The people pleaser prizes the need to be liked, to be appreciated, to be seen over pretty much everything and anything else. The people pleaser will put his or her needs on the back burner, always, in order to keep the peace, right? Keep the peace. It's about other needs first, of other people. I need to be liked. I need to be seen as the good girl, the good wife, the good daughter, right? Don't want to rock the boat here. Let's just keep the peace, make sure everything's okay. And this can come from a lot of different forms of trauma, but we do see it a lot in the more physically and mentally abusive types of trauma, where the only way we associate love is with something that, we're the last. We're not deserving of love, so we put ourselves last. That comes from some signature event early on in life where we took on the incorrect belief that we're not worthy of love unless we perform in a certain way, right? And I work with a lot of people-pleasing clients, so I'm pretty good at being able to help people through that. The stickler, perfectionism, right? The perfectionist, the highly critical, highly skeptical. This is often the type of personality that, when completing a project, if not all of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, that it's scrap it and get rid of it. It's not good. It's not good. Can't let a project go. I used to have a lot of this in my energy, but I don't have it anymore. And it would look like, for me in my business, that if I was creating content, it had to be perfect before I could put it out in the world. It had to be tested. It had to be perfect. I had to have it look this way or whatever. I don't do that anymore. If sometimes I need to do a Facebook Live, I'll do it when my hair is wet and I don't have makeup on. But when you are in this place of the perfectionist, you tend to be highly critical, not only of yourself, but of others. And it can be a real bone of contention in relationships when you are the perfectionist, especially if you have a spouse or, you have kids. And we all know kids, God bless them, they can be less than perfect. And so this is something that is a real trial for the perfectionist, to believe that they're living up to their highest ideal just as they are. That's a very hard thing for the perfectionist to be able to grapple with, but it's possible. And when you roll over that potential into your master aspect, you learn how to do it. And then the final one is the hypervigilant. So lots of doubt, worry, constantly preoccupied, because the hypervigilant is someone who spends a lot of time in their own head. Okay. So a lot of preoccupation, worrying about all the different ways that things could go wrong. And I bet you can guess, if we were to roll that potential over into the master aspect, when this misused potential gets to see the light of your love and it moves into the positive aspect, then you can use that creative ability, because hypervigilants are incredibly creative. They can imagine all these ways that shit can go wrong, but they can also imagine all the ways that things could work out. And it's really just habituation, it's conditioning, that the hypervigilant has gotten to be that way, where they focus on all the things going wrong, the other shoe falling, etc. But you can use that same amount of energy, that same potential, to imagine all the things going right. Right? So we're going to go deeper into this tomorrow. But tonight, your homework is to take the saboteur assessment. Again, it's in the comments here, and I will create a separate post for it. And get your results, because they get mailed to you pretty much instantaneously. So get your results, read through them, look over them, and go over what we talked about here today, what I discussed here today. What resonates with you now that, in the way that I set this up and started talking about this at the beginning of the call. Now that you see this particular assessment, what resonates for you from this talk? What are your big takeaways? And if you have questions tomorrow, I'm happy to answer them. I want this to be interactive. And I want you to ask me questions about your saboteurs, because that's what tomorrow's all about. I want to be able to help you through them. Yes, this is an introduction to In Alignment and Thriving Core program, but I'm not just going to leave this here. That's not how I am. That's not who I am as a teacher. I'm not just going to leave this here and be like, oh, take the saboteur assessment and then good luck with that. have fun with all this stuff now that you're like, what do I do now? Obviously, this is a huge, huge part of what I share in Alignment and Thriving Core program, but it goes much deeper, as I explained. We have a much deeper unveiling of this work when we go through the core wound process, shadow work. But I can help you tomorrow look at how some of these, like let's just take your top 3 saboteurs that show up on your chart and work with them and see how we can, find a way, find a silver lining in the clouds here of how we can kind of move that into more of an energetic potential that is serving you instead of harnessing energy and depleting the fullness of your life, okay? So I hope you'll join us tomorrow for this. We'll start hopefully on time tomorrow at 12:15 p.m. Pacific time. So thanks for joining me. Lots of love and peace. Mwah. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.